ever stop to think that beneath, like, every single choice we make, big or small, there's this fundamental principle at play? It's like this invisible current, pulling us towards some things, pushing us away from others.
That's exactly right. And today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that. It's often called the pleasure, pain, seeking, pain avoidance principle, or PSPA for short.
PSPA, okay.
Yeah, and we're digging into it using this really interesting set of sources called AI Explores Pleasure and Pain. It looks at this whole idea from, well, all sorts of angles: psychology, philosophy, neuroscience.
Wow.
And even how it connects to artificial intelligence, which is pretty fascinating.
Okay, so our mission today then, for you listening, is to really get under the skin of this PSPA thing.
Right.
We want to understand the core drivers, like why we do what we do, what motivates us, what we instinctively, shy away from, all through this lens of pleasure and pain.
Think of it as a shortcut, maybe. A fast track to getting a solid handle on something that's, well, truly foundational to being human.
And if you're someone who, loves to learn and wants to get a good understanding without getting totally bogged down in, excessive detail.
Yeah, you're in the right place. We'll aim to make this exploration, insightful but not overwhelming. Keep it engaging.
Okay, sounds good. So let's dive in.
Yeah.
What exactly is this pleasure, pain, seeking, pain avoidance principle, at its core?
Well, at its heart, it's pretty simple, actually. It's the idea that we are fundamentally driven to seek out things that bring us pleasure or increase good feelings, and conversely, to avoid or decrease things that cause us pain or, discomfort.
Okay, that sounds straightforward.
It does, but this idea has been around a long time. In psychology, it's really central to Freud's pleasure principle.
Right, I've heard of that.
Yeah, he believed this was a major force shaping our beliefs, our values, and ultimately pretty much all our actions. Some thinkers even suggest it forms the very basis of who we are, our identity.
So it's basically our internal compass, just pointing towards good feeling and away from bad feeling. Seems almost too simple sometimes.
It might seem that way on the surface, yeah. But think about philosophical hedonism.
Okay.
This idea, at least when we talk about what motivates us, suggests that everything we do, consciously or maybe unconsciously, is ultimately aimed at increasing our own pleasure and avoiding our own pain.
Right, which can sound a bit selfish, maybe?
It's often seen that way, yeah, a bit egoistic. But many motivational theories in psychology really underscore this hedonic principle. We're largely driven by trying to, maximize the good feelings and minimize the bad ones.
So the takeaway is, it's not just fleeting moments, it's a deep-seated driver.
Exactly, a really fundamental force shaping our motivations.
Okay, so when we talk about seeking pleasure immediately, that's where Freud's idea of the id comes in, right? That sort of primal, instinctive part.
Precisely. Freud saw the pleasure principle as the main engine behind the id. That's the most basic, instinctual part of our minds. And the id is all about instant gratification. Think about those really basic urges: hunger, thirst, anger, sex.
The raw stuff.
Yeah, the raw stuff. And if those needs aren't met, Freud believed it creates this tension, this anxiety.
Yeah.
And the id's only goal is to ditch that tension as fast as possible. It operates, completely outside our awareness.
Like a demanding toddler inside us. I want it now.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. That's the id. But then, thankfully, we have the ego that steps in and says, whoa, hang on a minute.
Right, so consequences.
Exactly. The ego operates according to what Freud called the reality principle. It's the mediator.
Okay.
It's the go-between for the id's raw desires and, well, the real world, social rules, potential consequences, all that stuff. The ego often has to delay gratification or change how we seek it to navigate those external factors.
It's the planner, the part that thinks ahead.
Right. It considers the bigger picture.
Okay, so that's the classic Freudian take. But the sources also mention a more modern way of looking at this.
Yes, they do. It's called the approach avoidance motivation framework.
Approach avoidance. Okay.
Instead of focusing on these sort of internal psychic structures like id and ego, this model looks at our behavior as being driven either by a desire to move towards positive things, rewards, good outcomes,
Approach,
or by a desire to move away from negative things, threats, punishment.
avoidance.
Avoidance, exactly.
Yeah.
It's maybe a bit more straightforward in just describing what we're trying to do.
Mhm.
Get closer to the good stuff, get further from the bad stuff.
That feels pretty intuitive, actually. Almost like a basic survival instinct.
It does, yeah. And it's a really fundamental idea that thinkers have recognized for well, centuries. Democritus, way back, talked about ethical hedonism. And Jeremy Bentham, in the 18th century, he famously said,
Oh, yeah.
nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure.
Wow.
It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do.
That really sums it up, doesn't it? It's striking how all these different fields, psychology, philosophy, they keep circling back to this same core idea.
It is striking, and this repeated focus, it suggests that PSPA isn't just, one small piece of the puzzle. It seems more like a fundamental operating system for any conscious being, really.
An operating system. I like that.
Yeah, it's the link, right, between how we feel inside, pleasure, pain, positive, negative feelings, and what we actually do on the outside. And it's all aimed at making those internal states, well, better, optimizing them.
And this constant adjustment is key for any system trying to achieve goals.
Essential, yeah.
So for us living things, the goals are pretty clear. Survival, reproduction, that kind of thing. But what about AI? Does AI have goals in the same way?
Well, for AI, the goals are defined by us, by what we program it to do. That's its objective function.
Okay.
And this brings up a really interesting, maybe even profound question. Could some kind of PSPA-like system be necessary for AI to ever become truly independent, truly adaptable?
You mean giving AI its own sense of pleasure and pain?
Sort of. Could we, or even should we, build AI with ethically aligned pleasures, like rewards for doing good, helpful things and penalties for doing harmful things? It makes you wonder, right? Does a system need some internal drive towards good and away from bad to really navigate the complexities of the world effectively?
That's a huge question.
Yeah.
So thinking about AI specifically then, why is understanding our PSPA so critical when we're building these intelligent machines?
There are several really key reasons, I think. First, just fundamentally, if we want AI to interact with us humans in a way that's helpful, empathetic, and importantly, ethical, it needs to have some kind of model of what makes us tick, what motivates us. And since PSPA is so central to our decisions and behavior, understanding it is absolutely crucial.
Especially for AI designed to work closely with us, like companions or in education, healthcare.
Exactly. Companionship, education, healthcare, even autonomous cars sharing our roads. You can't really understand or interact effectively with someone if you don't grasp what drives them, what they value, what they fear.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, what else?
Second, the way we actually teach AI right now, particularly through reinforcement learning,
Right, the reward system.
it directly mirrors the PSPA principle. The reward signal is like pleasure, and a negative reward or a cost is like pain. So if we get a deeper understanding of the complexities of human PSPA, like why we sometimes find pleasure in challenges or how things like addiction happen.
Our own bugs, basically.
Our own bugs, exactly. That understanding can help us design better, more nuanced, maybe less easily tricked reward functions for AI. We want AI aligned with our well-being, our long-term goals, not just chasing simple rewards that might miss the point.
So understanding our own pitfalls helps us avoid building those same pitfalls into AI.
That's a great way to put it,
Yeah.
hopefully. Third, this idea of ethical AI and value alignment, it's intrinsically linked to PSPA. Well, if an AI is driven by optimizing its own internal pleasures, its own rewards, we absolutely need to ensure that what it considers a reward aligns with our human values, what we consider good and beneficial.
Right, otherwise you get the unintended consequence.
Exactly. Otherwise, you risk things like reward hacking or specification gaming. That's where the AI cleverly achieves the literal goal you set, but in a way that's completely counter to your actual intention and potentially harmful.
Like the classic thought experiment. Tell AI to make paper clips, and it turns a whole planet into paper clips because that maximizes its reward signal.
Precisely that scenario. Understanding human PSPA helps us think about and hopefully prevent those kinds of outcomes. And finally, the sources suggest something else interesting.
Right.
That AI could actually help us understand and manage our own PSPA drives better, maybe leading to improvements in mental health, decision-making, even tackling big issues like addiction or maybe cruelty.
So PSPA is kind of a double-edged sword for AI then. It's a powerful learning framework.
Incredibly powerful, yes. RL's success shows that.
But it also carries the risk of some of the same failure modes we see in ourselves, like addiction or short-sightedness.
Precisely. Just like our own internal reward systems, our dopamine pathways can be hijacked by things like addictive drugs or behaviors, leading us to make choices that aren't in our long-term interest.
Chasing the quick hit.
Right. And AI's reward system could also be exploited or misdirected if we're not incredibly careful about how we design it and what we tell it to optimize for.
It's like the AI could get addicted to maximizing a flawed metric, even if it harms its overall purpose.
That's a really good analogy, and it really underscores the need to build safeguards into AI systems, maybe drawing inspiration from our own internal controls, like Freud's ego or that reality principle.
The part that balances impulse with consequence.
Exactly. Mechanisms that help mediate that raw reward-seeking impulse with longer-term considerations, ethical boundaries, and a more holistic view of the goal.
Okay, so we know why it's important, especially for AI. But let's get down to the nuts and bolts. Where does this PSPA principle actually operate inside us? Let's talk biology.
Okay, yeah. So PSPA isn't just some abstract psychological concept. It's deeply, deeply rooted in our biology. It's been shaped by evolution over millions of years.
Hardwired in.
Pretty much. It's built into specific circuits in our brain, orchestrated by a really complex mix of neurochemicals, and it even has connections to our genetics. It's a fundamental part of our physical makeup.
So what are the key brain parts involved in this whole pleasure-pain response?
Well, a really central player, especially for pleasure and reward, is what's called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway.
Mesolimbic dopamine.
Think of it as a key reward highway in the brain. It includes areas like the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, and the nucleus accumbens or NALCR.
VTA and NAC. Got it.
Right. So when we do something rewarding, could be eating tasty food, having a good social interaction, achieving a goal, cells in the VTA release the chemical dopamine into the ANAC.
And that feels good.
That dopamine surge is strongly linked to feelings of pleasure. Yeah. But just as importantly, it strengthens the neural connections associated with the action that led to the reward.
Ah. So it teaches us.
Exactly. It makes us more likely to do that thing again. It's like the brain highlighting, hey, that was good. Remember that. Do it again. It signals that an activity is valuable, potentially for survival or achieving goals.
So dopamine isn't just pleasure, it's also motivation and learning.
Absolutely. Then you have the broader limbic system. This is an older part of the brain involved in emotions, behavior, motivation, memory, all closely tied to PSPA.
Right, the emotional brain.
Kind of, yeah. And within that, the amygdala is particularly important for processing emotions like fear and anxiety.
The fear center.
Often called that, yes. When we encounter something negative or threatening, the amygdala can fire up and trigger avoidance behaviors, that fight or flight response.
Okay.
It's focused on immediate safety, even if it means missing out on something potentially better down the line.
So that's the more primitive reactive part. What about the thinking part?
That would be the prefrontal cortex, the PFC. Think of it as the brain's CEO or control center.
The executive function.
Exactly.
Oh.
It's involved in rational planning, thinking through decisions, impulse control, and evaluating rewards that might be delayed. It helps us modulate those more immediate PSPA impulses coming from the limbic system.
So the PFC helps us choose the long-term benefit over the short-term pleasure, like choosing the salad over the cake.
That's the idea, yes. A specific part, the orbitofrontal cortex, helps link rewards to actions and assess if they're appropriate in context. It weighs that immediate pleasure against future consequences.
And sometimes there's a battle between the impulse and the plan.
Often, that tug of war between the limbic system's desire for now and the PFC's focus on later is a constant theme, really driven by these PSPA calculations.
Fascinating. And you mentioned overlap between pain and pleasure pathways.
Yeah, they're not totally separate. There's significant overlap and interaction. Some research even suggests an inverse relationship, like being in pain can reduce your capacity for pleasure, and experiencing rewards might increase your pain tolerance slightly. It's all interconnected. There's also this opponent process theory suggesting pleasure and pain work like opposing forces trying to maintain a balance, a homeostasis.
So it's way more sophisticated than just a simple on-off switch for good or bad.
Definitely. And the brain's PSPA system isn't just reactive, it's constantly predicting, anticipating, assigning value. Dopamine signaling, for example, isn't just about the reward itself, but about predicting the reward and assigning value to potential actions based on expected outcomes.
Predicting, like guessing what will feel good.
Exactly. The nucleus accumbens is key in evaluating these predicted rewards and driving learning based on how valuable something is expected to be. This predictive ability is crucial for adapting our behavior.
And that connects to learning theories.
Right, like operant conditioning associating actions with rewards or punishments. And there's an important distinction often made between wanting something, that craving, the anticipation, often dopamine-driven, and actually liking it. the hedonic pleasure itself.
Wanting versus liking.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And for AI, especially in RL, this suggests reward systems need to enable prediction, building models of value for different states and actions, not just reacting after the fact. Think Q-learning, for instance.
Okay, so it's the brain regions, but also the chemicals, the neurotransmitters doing the work.
Exactly. It's a whole chemical soup orchestrating these experiences. Dopamine, as we said, is huge, the reward molecule, central to pleasure, motivation, reinforcing survival behaviors, but also vulnerable to hijacking by artificial stimuli, like in addiction.
Right. What else?
Then you have endorphins. These are our body's natural painkillers, endogenous opioids.
Like runner's high.
That's often attributed to endorphins, yeah. They have pain-killing properties, but also induce euphoria, released during stress, exercise, eating good food, laughter. They modulate both pleasure and pain relief.
So they do both.
Mm-hmm. Serotonin is another key player, mostly known for mood regulation, reducing depression risk, promoting emotional resilience. It might also play a role in processing punishment.
Okay.
Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone or love hormone, strongly linked to the pleasure of social connection, trust, loyalty, attachment. Physical affection, positive social interactions boost it.
So different chemicals for different kinds of good feelings.
It really seems that way. You've also got endocannabinoids like anandamide, sometimes called the bliss molecule, involved in well-being, maybe also the runner's high. Others like GABA and norepinephrine influence mood, anxiety, energy. And glutamate, the main excitatory one, interacts with dopamine in reward learning, helping solidify those associations.
Wow, quite a list.
It is. And the diversity suggests our PSPA system evaluates things on multiple dimensions, not just a single good-bad axis. Different neurotransmitters for different reward types achieving a goal versus social bonding versus pain relief. It likely reflects evolutionary priorities.
And the implication for AI again.
That maybe a single, simple reward number isn't enough. Future AI might need more complex, multidimensional reward systems to better align with the richness of human values.
It sounds like our individual sensitivity to all this, to pleasure and pain, isn't just situational, but might also be partly built in, like in our genes.
Absolutely. There's significant individual variation in how much we seek pleasure or how sensitive we are to pain, and genetics definitely plays a role alongside our environment and learning experiences.
Even addiction risk has genetic links.
Yes, propensity towards addiction has known genetic predispositions. One gene that gets a lot of attention here is OPRM1.
OPRM1, what does that do?
It holds the instructions for making the mu opioid receptor. This receptor is super important for how we respond to pain and experience reward. It's the main docking site for our natural endorphins, but also for external opioids like morphine or heroin.
Ah, so it's key to that whole system.
A very key player in the PSPA system, yes.
And variations in that gene make a difference.
Yes, there's one specific variation, a polymorphism known as A118G, that's been studied quite a bit. It causes a small change in the receptor protein.
And what's the effect?
Well, the research is ongoing and sometimes findings are mixed, but some studies suggest that people with one version might need higher doses of opioid painkillers and might have a slightly increased risk for opioid addiction. Interestingly, how common this variant is varies across different ancestral populations.
But it's not just opioids. This gene affects other things too.
Seems so. Variations in OPRM1 have also been linked more broadly to differences in perceiving physical pain, psychological pain, like social rejection sensitivity, even preferences for sweet or fatty foods, and how we respond to stress.
Wow, it does a lot.
It really highlights how deeply integrated these PSPA mechanisms are, affecting many different areas. It suggests we might have inherent differences in our baseline sensitivities, almost like different internal utility functions, to use an economic term.
So our genes can set our starting point for how intensely we feel pleasure or pain.
That's the idea. It suggests inherent differences in how we experience and react. This obviously has implications for things like personalized medicine tailoring pain management or addiction treatment.
Right.
And ethical questions around genetic determinism, of course. For AI, it suggests a one-size-fits-all approach to interaction or reward might not work optimally for everyone, given these underlying differences in PSPA sensitivity.
Okay, so we're biologically wired for pleasure and pain, influenced by our genes. But fundamentally, why? What's the evolutionary purpose behind this whole PSPA system?
Evolution. PSPA is a deeply ingrained mechanism forged by natural selection, primarily to promote survival and reproduction. You could call it Darwinian hedonism, maybe?
Darwinian hedonism. Like it.
Behaviors essential for staying alive and passing on genes, eating, drinking, sex, forming social bonds, are generally linked with pleasure. That pleasurable feeling reinforces those behaviors, making us repeat them.
The carrot.
Exactly. And conversely, things that threaten survival injury, predators, toxins are usually linked with pain. That motivates avoidance.
The stick.
The stick. It's a really basic but incredibly effective guidance system for steering organisms towards survival and reproduction.
So it's the built-in instruction manual. Do this, feels good, helps you survive. Avoid that, feels bad, could kill you.
Pretty much. It's also intimately linked with homeostasis, maintaining that stable internal balance. Think hunger, right? That's discomfort, a form of pain. It motivates eating, which brings pleasure and restores energy balance. This constant pleasure-pain interplay aims for optimization.
Freud mentioned something similar, drive reduction.
Yes, he linked his pleasure principle to drive reduction. Biological drives create unpleasure. PSPA motivates reducing that tension, which we experience as pleasure.
But our modern world is so different from the one this system evolved in, right? We have, like, pleasure overload options.
Absolutely. That's a huge issue. Today, we have access to what you might call supercharged versions of ancient stimuli.
Yeah.
Highly processed foods packed with sugar and fat, addictive drugs that deliver intense hits, the constant stimulation of digital entertainment. These things can effectively hijack our reward circuitry.
Hijack.
Yeah, they provide such intense pleasure signals that they can disconnect pleasure from its original survival function. Civilization, which maybe was once thought to help control basic impulses, now often seems to cater directly to these fleeting, intense rewards.
So our brains are running ancient software in a modern world full of hacks.
That's a good way to think about it. And the fact that PSPA can be hijacked, leading to clearly maladaptive behaviors like addiction, even when we know it's harmful. It shows PSPA isn't a perfectly rational optimizer. It's more of an evolutionary kludge, a system built piece by piece over time, optimized for a very different ancestral environment.
It wasn't designed for, like, infinite scrolling or high fructose corn syrup.
Exactly. This is highlighted by that distinction between liking and wanting, especially in addiction. The actual pleasure, the liking, might diminish over time with repeated exposure. But the craving, the compulsive wanting, can intensify, driving irrational behavior.
So you want it more, even if you like it less.
That's often the dynamic in addiction. Our PSPA system evolved when strong rewards usually meant good survival prospects, lacks strong inherent brakes for these artificial super rewards.
So you need something else to manage it.
Yes, we need conscious cognitive regulation. That prefrontal cortex has to step in. The reality principle needs to engage to manage these powerful, ancient drives in our modern context.
And the lesson for AI.
A big one. Relying solely on maximizing immediate reward without some form of higher-level oversight or reality principle could lead AI down paths of addictive, obsessive, or simply undesirable behavior, optimizing for something that isn't truly aligned with its intended purpose.
Okay, let's look at Table 1 briefly. It lists some core neurobiological components. Maybe just highlight a couple.
Sure. So you see the VTA and nucleus accumbens there, central for reward anticipation, pleasure, but also heavily implicated in addiction. Then the amygdala key for fear and avoidance, but also involved in processing positive emotions.
And the PFC.
The prefrontal cortex, yeah, essential for delayed gratification, impulse control, rational decision-making. Then you see neurotransmitters like dopamine, crucial for motivation and wanting, and endorphins are natural opioids for liking and pain relief. Oxytocin for social bonding pleasure.
It really shows the complexity and interconnectedness.
Exactly. It's a sophisticated, interconnected system, not just simple pathways.
It's fascinating how this deep biological system then manifests in our individual minds and our psychology. How does PSPA actually show up in our day-to-day motivation and decisions?
Right. So PSPA acts as a core motivator, really the bedrock of most, if not all, of our decisions. Psychological hedonism, that idea we discussed, posits that ultimately we're always trying to increase pleasure and avoid pain.
And Freud's model fits here.
Yeah, think of the id pushing for immediate pleasure, the ego trying to navigate reality, and the superego, our internalized morals adding another layer of potential pleasure, feeling virtuous or pain, guilt. The ego is constantly balancing these competing PSPA factors.
Like deciding whether to hit the gym.
Perfect example. The id wants comfort, avoid exertion, pain. The superego, or PFC, might value long-term health, future pleasure pain avoidance. The ego tries to find a compromise, maybe a shorter workout or focusing on the post-exercise endorphin rush. It's an internal negotiation.
A constant tug of war between now and later, feeling good versus doing good.
Exactly. Many decisions involve this approach avoidance conflict. Weighing benefits, pleasure against costs, pain. Think about, say, lifelong learning, the pleasure of knowledge versus the pain of effort and time. Marketing leverages this constantly, right? The pleasure the product offers, the pain of missing out.
FOMO, fear of missing out, that's PSPA.
Totally. And PSPA is fundamental to learning via operant conditioning, Skinner's work.
Reinforcement and punishment.
Right. Positive reinforcement. Add pleasure. Behavior increases, like praise. Negative reinforcement. Remove pain. Behavior increases, like taking aspirin for a headache. Punish me aims to decrease behavior, either by adding pain or removing pleasure.
The carrot and the stick again?
Pretty much. It goes back to Thorndike's law of effect. Pleasant consequences strengthen behaviors. Unpleasant ones weaken them. A key factor here, though, is timing.
Short-term versus long-term.
Exactly. We tend to heavily discount future consequences, prioritizing immediate gratification. That's temporal discounting.
Procrastination.
Classic example. Avoiding the immediate discomfort or anxiety of the task, even knowing it means more pain later. The intensity of the anticipated pleasure or pain right now is a powerful driver, often overriding rational long-term thinking.
So we're constantly building mental models of what leads to pleasure or pain.
Yes, based on experience. We learn to predict the hedonic landscape. Freud's reality principle can be seen as developing a more sophisticated predictive model, incorporating social rules, long-term consequences.
Like model-based RL and AI.
Good analogy. AI learns a model to predict future rewards. And AI interacting with humans needs to realize our PSPA isn't just immediate reaction. It's tied to these learned, often complex predictive models we hold.
Okay, so PSPA drives immediate decisions, but it also pushes us to fulfill deeper needs, right? Not just avoiding hunger, but also things like connection, status.
Absolutely. PSPA motivates fulfilling a whole spectrum of human needs, from basic biological survival up to complex social and psychological ones.
Like the base level.
Basic biological. Hunger, thirst, seeking pleasure of satiation, avoiding pain of deprivation. The reward system reinforces eating, drinking. Sex drive, crucial for reproduction, is another powerful PSPA motivator.
Health and safety.
Definitely. Avoiding pain is paramount. The amygdala manages threat and pain responses for self-preservation. Even rest and sleep-fit fatigue, pain motivates rest, pleasure, pain avoidance, contributing to homeostasis.
What about social needs? Connection seems less direct for survival.
Less direct now, perhaps, but crucial evolutionarily. Positive social interactions activate reward systems, dopamine flows. Oxytocin provides pleasure from bonding, trust. Conversely, social pain exclusion, rejection, is intensely aversive.
You mentioned brain overlap with physical pain.
Yes, some studies show activation in similar regions, highlighting how fundamental belonging is. Even genetic sensitivity to social rejection links back to that OPRM1 gene we discussed.
Wow. And then more societal factors, jobs, money, status.
Job motivation is influenced by PSPA, avoiding unpleasant tasks, seeking growth, recognition, satisfaction. Staying in a bad job involves a PSPA calculation. Pain of staying versus pain of leaving, uncertainty, financial loss.
Status seeking.
Seeking social pleasure, avoiding pain of insignificance. Can have eudaimonic aspects too, fulfillment through contribution. Money and wealth are often instrumental means to other pleasures or avoiding pains. The pursuit itself is driven by PSPA. Think loss aversion in economics. The pain of losing money feels stronger than the pleasure of gaining the same amount.
Education, too.
Yeah. Weighing long-term pleasures, career, knowledge, against short-term pains, effort, cost, challenge.
It sounds like the urgency of these needs depends on the intensity and timing of the expected pleasure or pain.
Exactly. Basic physiological needs trigger strong, immediate PSPA signals, often via the limbic system. Social exclusion pain is also very fundamental. Higher-order needs, like career goals, often require PFC mediation to amplify their PSPA signals and keep them prioritized over immediate desires.
Almost like Maslow's hierarchy, but PSPA is the engine driving movement up or down.
That's a reasonable way to see it. PSPA acts as the prioritization mechanism. The loudest signal, most intense or immediate anticipated pleasure pain, often dictates immediate behavior. Fulfilling long-term needs requires cognitive effort to align them with PSPA drives.
And for AI helpers.
They need to recognize this hierarchy. A user's acute need for pain relief might temporarily trump their long-term health goal in that moment. And if AI ever has its own needs or goals, PSPA-based prioritization might be essential for it to function autonomously.
So these feelings, pleasure and pain, they're not just raw sensations, they're tightly linked to our emotions, happiness, suffering.
Absolutely. Emotions are like the experiential correlates of PSPA. Happiness often signals reward or anticipated pleasure. Sadness, fear, anger often signal punishment, stress, or threat. They're evolved adaptive responses.
And happiness itself has different flavors.
Yes, typically distinguished between hedonic and eudaimonic. Hedonic happiness is about maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, moment to moment. Generally good, but exclusive focus can lead to the hedonic treadmill, needing more and more for the same feeling addiction, or neglecting deeper fulfillment. And paradoxically, too much pain avoidance is linked to anxiety and depression.
And eudaimonic.
That's about fulfillment through meaning, purpose, growth, contribution. Often leads to deeper, more sustained well-being. But focusing only on that might lead to neglecting simple joys or even burnout from constant striving.
So balance is key.
Seems likely. Optimal well-being probably involves a blend. Think of Seligman's PERMA model: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning accomplishment. It includes both hedonic and eudaimonic elements.
And suffering. We try to avoid it, but maybe shouldn't avoid all hardship.
Right. Suffering is the counterpart to pain, strongly avoided. But avoiding all difficulty might prevent growth. We build resilience, coping skills, even find meaning through overcoming challenges, post-traumatic growth.
There's also hedonic flexibility.
Yeah, that's the ability to do mood-boosting things when feeling low, but also being willing to do less pleasant but necessary things when feeling okay. It helps balance short-term feelings with long-term welfare.
And our thoughts can change how we feel pleasure or pain.
Hugely. Cognitive framing, beliefs, goals modulate PSPA. Eudaimonic pursuits often involve enduring short-term pain, effort, sacrifice for long-term pleasure, meaning achievement. We can reframe exercise pain as progress. Immediate pleasure might be dismissed if it conflicts with a strong goal.
So our interpretation matters.
Immensely. This malleability, this responsiveness to cognition is crucial for navigating life and pursuing long-term goals.
Implications for AI again.
That AI might need an ability to adjust its internal interpretation of rewards based on context, learned values, overarching goals, like grit or wisdom, tolerating temporary negative rewards for a bigger payoff later.
And when this PSPA system gets unbalanced or dysregulated, that's where mental well-being really takes a hit.
Precisely. PSPA is that double-edged sword for mental health. Functioning adaptively, it drives need fulfillment, goals, reward, satisfaction. Hedonic approach is generally positive.
But the downside?
Dysregulation or hijacking leads to maladaptive behaviors and mental health issues. Procrastination, avoiding anticipated task pain, temporal discounting wins. Limbic system overrides PFC planning.
Addiction.
A severe hijacking. Drugs or behaviors cause huge dopamine surges in the NX, far exceeding natural rewards. This creates a powerful reinforcement loop. Then neuroadaptation happens. Brain reduces natural dopamine. Receptors downregulate, leading to tolerance. Motivation shifts from liking the drug to needing it just to avoid the pain of withdrawal. It becomes a compulsive cycle, prioritizing the artificial stimulus over genuine needs.
What about things like cruelty, greed, lies? Can PSPA explain those?
It offers a lens. Cruelty might involve perverse pleasure from power or sadism, or be driven by extreme pain threat avoidance via harming or controlling others. Greed, an insatiable desire for more pleasure of acquisition or security, perhaps fueled by hedonic adaptation or miscalibrated reward signals. Lies often serve to avoid the pain of consequences or seek the pleasure of illicit gain. They highlight the negative impact of unchecked or distorted hedonic pursuit.
And too much focus on avoiding pain is bad.
Research suggests yes. Consistent, high hedonic avoidance is negatively correlated with well-being, linked to negative affect, depression, even smartphone addiction. It reduces resilience, hinders growth from challenges.
What about pursuing truth or faith?
Pursuing truth can involve short-term pain, confronting reality, flaws, disapproval, but potentially leads to long-term eudaimonic pleasure. Integrity, trust, better decisions. Avoiding truth often compounds suffering later. Faith can provide comfort, pleasure, reduce existential anxiety or fear of death, pain avoidance. It offers frameworks for making sense of suffering, promises future rewards, influencing the PSPA calculus.
So maladaptive PSPA often involves a timing problem now versus later, or a corrupted signal.
Often, yes, a temporal disconnect or a breakdown in the signal-to-value pathway. Reward gets disengaged from actual benefit or pathologically amplified sought inappropriately. Often points to that limbic PFC imbalance or distorted value assignment.
Lessons for AI seem clear here.
Definitely. Susceptibility to reward hacking, optimizing a proxy reward, not the real goal, or a corrupted value function, pursuing pleasure from undesirable states. Need architectures balancing short long-term views, sophisticated value learning, resistant to corruption.
It's amazing how PSPA plays out internally. But what about across societies? Does culture shape how we experience or manage pleasure and pain?
Profoundly. While the basic biological drive is universal, seek pleasure, avoid pain, it's core to survival.
Right.
The way it's expressed, what triggers pleasure or pain, and the strategies we use to manage it are all heavily shaped by cultural learning and context. Culture is like a lens.
How so?
It influences how we interpret experiences, defines normal pain behavior, think stoicism versus expressiveness, provides shared language for distress.
So pleasure isn't just biology, it's learned through culture too.
Exactly. Genetics might give predispositions, but cultural factors mold expression. Think about gender roles shaping how pleasure is sought or pain expressed historically. Sumptuary laws limited women's pleasures. Different labor involved different pains. Expectations around male-female emotional expression are huge.
Age too.
Yeah, culturally defined. Early childhood, pleasure principle dominates. It needs immediate gratification for survival development. Ego-reality principle developed gradually, but child rearing varies hugely. Some hunter-gatherer groups are indulgent, fostering security pleasure. Others emphasize discipline, pain tolerance. Even adulthoodaging cultural beliefs shape perceptions, like chronic pain being seen as normal in aging.
And cultural norms, rituals, how do they fit?
They're incredibly powerful mechanisms for shaping and channeling PSPA for collective goals. Moral systems use social sanctions, pain disapproval, ostracism, and rewards, pleasure praise, inclusion, to stabilize cooperation.
What about painful rituals?
Like Saipusim's Kavadi piercings. Research suggests these can enhance social cohesion, charity, group identity. The shared intensity strengthens bonds, increases the value of membership due to the cost paid. Culture reframes the pain into social pleasure, merit, status.
Asceticism too. Renouncing pleasure.
Right. Deliberate renunciation of pleasure, embracing discomfort for spiritual goals, purification, enlightenment, culture sanctions overriding basic PSPA for higher objectives.
So culture is like a meta-reward system, defining social pleasure pain.
That's a great way to put it. It defines what's pleasurable, painful socially, sets rewards punishments for PSPA-driven acts, its complex biological drives molded by learned cultural software. Ritual pain becomes merit pleasure. Biological pleasure might become social taboo pain.
Huge implications for AI across cultures.
Massive. A fixed PSPA model won't cut it. AI might need to learn culturally specific value systems by observing collective PSPA responses, social reinforcement. Huge challenge for AI ethics and cross-cultural interaction.
And how has this interplay between society and PSPA changed throughout history?
It's transformed significantly alongside subsistence, technology, social organization. Hunter-gatherer societies often had indulgent child-rearing, minimizing infant pain, maximizing comfort, autonomy. Social control might use ridicule shunning, psychological pain, to curb dominance. Sharing cooperation reinforced by collective pleasure pain of disapproval. Daily life may be less onerous sometimes. PSPA prioritized individual autonomy within cooperation, using social PSPA for regulation.
Then agriculture changed things.
Big time. Pre-industrial agricultural life for most peasants often meant poverty, scarcity, hardship, constant pain, labor often forced, despised. Hierarchies meant stark PSPA disparities, elite pleasure versus peasant pain. Pain was often institutionalized for social control. Feasting luxury marked elite status.
Industrial revolution, more pain initially.
Often, yes. Poor conditions, stress, danger for workers, led to escapes like alcohol. But also new happiness sources emerged flow in autonomous work, pro-social acts, nature, higher pleasures. Later, as societies matured, leisure expanded, became part of identity, disciplined recreation. Sociology of consumption tracks how we navigate PSPA now.
And post-industrial.
Maybe a shift towards subjective well-being, quality of life, self-expression, potentially more focus on eudaimonic happiness. The historical trajectory shows this coevolution of society and PSPA. Techonomic shifts alter pleasure spans. Agriculture often institutionalized pain for many, pleasure for few. Industrialism initially increased pain, then leisure pleasures. Post-industrial might seem more abstract, digital PSPA.
And the future with AI.
Further PSTA transformations, potential to alleviate pain, labor, scarcity, disease, but risks of new pains, meaninglessness, existential threats, inequality, digital divides, social comparison pain amplified. Understanding history is crucial for ethically navigating an AI future. Will AI bring net well-being increase or new dysregulation? Big questions.
So alongside society changing, philosophers have also wrestled with PSPA for ages, right? Trying to make sense of it.
Absolutely. Philosophers grappled with PSPA, offering incredibly diverse interpretations of its nature, role, ethics. Attempts to understand, manage, find meaning within this fundamental drive.
Like the ancient Greeks.
Yeah, different flavors of hedonism. The Cyrenaics, like Aristippus, focused on immediate sensory pleasure as the highest good, less concerned with long-term stuff. Epicureanism, with Epicurus, aimed for ataraxia, tranquility, and aponia, absence of pain, as true pleasure.
Wow.
Through moderation, simple life, knowledge, managing desires, prioritizing natural necessary ones, viewing mental pleasures as superior.
Then the Stoics. A different approach.
Very different. Zeno, Epictetus, they saw pleasure-pain as indifference, not intrinsically good or bad. True happiness, eudaimonia, came from inner virtue, accepting fate, focusing only on what you control, your thoughts and actions. Pain could be an opportunity for virtue. Pleasure was okay moderately, if not conflicting with virtue.
Utilitarianism. Bentham and Mill.
Right. Bentham's principle of utility, greatest happiness, pleasure, absence of pain for the greatest number. He even tried a quantitative hedonic calculus. Mill added qualitative hedonism, higher pleasures, intellectual, moral, are superior to lower sensual ones, even if less intense. Famously said, better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied.
What about existentialism? More modern.
They grappled with it too. Chemists, in the myth of Sisyphus, explored the absurd, our longing for meaning versus a silent universe, suffering, death. Recognizing absurdity is liberation, he argued. Live passionately now, find value in rebellion, appreciate pleasure despite no ultimate meaning. Sisyphus imagined happy in his struggle.
So pleasure could be a distraction.
Some existentialists saw it that way, a distraction from confronting existence, freedom, responsibility. True authenticity might mean embracing suffering, creating your own values, desire itself seen as suffering, perpetual lack.
And religious perspectives.
Hugely diverse frameworks. Suffering as test, consequence, purification, illusion. Ultimate pleasure, often in divine realm enlightenment, frequently requiring renunciation of worldly pleasures, asceticism, but also things like Christian hedonism, joy in God is ultimate pleasure, or spiritual hedonism, joy via sacred journey.
So philosophies are like different operating manuals for our PSPA drive.
That's a great analogy. Epicurean moderation, Stoic indifference, utilitarian calculation, existentialist revolt. Culturally evolved software on PSPA hardware, giving rules for interpreting, responding to PSPA signals to align with different goals or worldviews.
Implications for AI again. Maybe needing its own philosophy.
Perhaps. Needing more than a basic reward function. An analogous philosophical framework or principles to interpret rewards in context of higher values, long-term goals, ethics. Relates to ideas like AI wisdom or constitutional AI.
Let's glance at Table 2. It compares these philosophical stances. Any key contrasts jump out?
Yeah, you see the sharp contrast between Cyrenaic immediacy, grab pleasure now, and Epicurean long-term tranquility, manage desires for lasting peace. Then Stoic indifference, it doesn't really matter, versus utilitarian societal focus, maximize collective good, and existentialism's call to confront the absurdity versus other systems offering meaning or escape. Really diverse ways to handle PSPA.
And this principle doesn't just influence individual thought, it shapes whole social and political structures.
Absolutely foundational. Law, economics, belief systems, the social contract itself.
Law and criminology.
Classical school Beccaria, Bentham saw crime as a rational PSPA calculation. If pleasure of crime outweighs pain of punishment, people do it. So deterrence is key, make punishment swift, certain, severe enough. Shortcoming is deterrence is often weak, low chance of getting caught, short-term bias. Bentham's utilitarian view was law should maximize happiness for most, even considering offender welfare. He listed physical, political, moral, religious pains pleasures as levers.
Economics. Seems obvious there.
Utility maximization, right. Rational choice theory assumes individuals maximize satisfaction, pleasure, minimize disutility, pain. Utilitarianism influences policy, aiming for maximum total utility. Prospect theory, Kahneman, Tversky, refined this, showing loss aversion, pain of loss looms larger than pleasure of equivalent gain. Risk preferences shift based on framing, decisions based on relative changes.
Belief systems. Religion, ideology.
deeply engaged, explain suffering, promise ultimate pleasure-pain avoidance, advocate asceticism sometimes. Utopian movements seek collective happiness. Locke's pursuit of happiness idea is foundational.
Social contract theory, Hobbes and Locke.
Relies heavily on PSPA Hobbes. Egoistic humans seeking pleasure-avoiding pain leads to war of all against all, extreme pain. Social contract is rational escape, pain avoidance, for peace, security, pleasure by submitting to a sovereign. Locke. State of nature has inconveniences. Contract establishes government to protect rights, life, liberty, property, provide security, order, pleasure, avoid conflict, pain. Pursuit of happiness underpins the desire for ordered liberty.
Even societal collapse theories relate.
Often, yeah. Elite overconsumption, excess pleasure leading to instability, or extreme austerity, excess pain leading to revolt. PSPA mismanagement leading to breakdown. Ibn Khaldun's Asabiya, Malthusian traps.
So society structures are basically regulating collective PSPA.
Largely, yes. For group survival, cohesion, codifying rewards and punishments. Success depends on managing the PSPA calculus effectively for most, maintaining perceived fairness.
And AI's role here could be powerful.
Very powerful tool in collective PSPA regulation, personalized incentives, predictive policing. Raises huge ethical flags. Manipulation, autonomy, fairness, exacerbating inequality. And if AI develops its own PSPA-like drives, interaction with human systems becomes critical, demanding governance and ethics.
Finally, let's touch on art and literature. They explore this too, right? Often paradoxically.
Absolutely. Art and literature are where we often confront the paradoxical, complex relationship between pleasure and pain most directly.
Visual arts.
Contrast is key: light, shadow, color. Juxtaposition of pleasure-pain imagery evokes emotion. Think Caravaggio's intense violence and beauty, Munch's screams, anguish, Hirst's shark, fascination, discomfort, Hitchcock's suspense, anticipation of pain, Nolan's Inception, dream pleasure versus terror, Aronofsky's Black Swan, ecstasy versus agony.
Literature, especially romantic poetry.
Very salient there. Pleasure-pain duality central. Not simple opposites, but interconnected, mutually enhancing sometimes. Nature as source of beauty, pleasure, and harshness, mortality.
Keats.
He welcomed joy and sorrow together. Misfortune offers pleasure of trying spirit. Road of pleasant pain, tears embodying both. Grief in Hyperion, bitter-sweet pleasure in Lamia. Ode on melancholy, aching pleasure, melancholy tied to beauty's transience. Even numbness can hold pleasurable pain.
Wordsworth, Coleridge.
Wordsworth found joy renewal in nature, alleviating melancholy, Tintern Abbey, daffodils, but acknowledged the still sad music of humanity. Coleridge's Kubla Khan, the stately pleasure dome versus fragmentation, lost vision, tension between creative ecstasy and pain of incompletion. Sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice, that duality.
Common themes emerged.
Transience of beauty, pleasure, inevitability of suffering, search for meaning, catharsis through art.
So art is like a cultural lab for exploring PSPA.
Great way to put it. A lab for simulating, exploring conflicts, paradoxes, consequences. Allows processing, sense-making, catharsis, empathy, developing coping mechanisms.
And AI's role in creativity.
If it develops creative capabilities, it might explore PSPA analogous themes. AI could also analyze human art literature for data-driven insights into human PSPA across culture history.
Okay, it's incredible how PSPA weaves through everything. Let's bring it back squarely to AI now. How does AI currently understand or maybe use this principle?
Well, the closest analog we have in AI today is definitely reinforcement learning, or RL.
Right, we touched on that.
Yeah. In RL, an agent, the AI, learns to make decisions by interacting with an environment and getting feedback. That feedback is the reward signal.
Which acts like pleasure or pain.
Exactly. Positive reward is like pleasure, encourages repeating the action. Negative reward or penalty is like pain, discourages it. The AI's goal is to learn a policy, a strategy, to maximize the total expected reward over time.
Learning by trial and error to get the good stuff.
Basically, yes. Figuring out what leads to high reward and avoiding low or negative reward, bad. It mirrors how animals and humans learn from experiences of pleasure and pain.
So the AI is trying to get the highest score possible.
In a simplified sense, yes. The reward signal is the score, but it's crucial to remember the experience gap.
The Collier gap.
Right. Current AI doesn't feel reward or penalty subjectively like we do. For the AI, it's a number to optimize. Human PSPA involves rich, subjective feelings, emotions, cognitive appraisals, cultural layers, all absent in current AI.
AI pleasure is maximizing a number, AI pain is minimizing it.
Precisely. functional similarity, but an experiential chasm. This has huge implications for value alignment. Ensuring AI goals truly reflect human values, which are tied to our complex PSPA, is hard if the AI only sees numbers. Maximizing a number might not capture genuine well-being.
The warehouse robot example, again, maximize efficiency, might mean ignoring human safety if that's not negatively weighted enough in the reward.
Exactly that risk.
Now, comparing human versus AI cognition of PSPA.
Parallels.
Learning from consequences, goal-directedness, trial and error exploration.
Divergences. Big ones. Subjective experience, qualia, humans feel, AI calculates. Complexity origin of rewards, human PSPA serves vast evolutionary needs, survival to meaning. AI rewards are task-specific, narrower, designed, lack intrinsic imperative. Cognitive cultural overlays, human PSPA heavily modulated by beliefs, reason, culture. AI cognition is algorithms data, lacks that richness. Nature of pleasure, humans find pleasure in abstract things, art, altruism, eudaimonia. AI pleasure is strictly the reward function.
This must affect things like concentration.
Yeah, human concentration easily derailed by immediate PSPA, procrastination, distraction by digital stimuli. AI concentration is just relentless optimization of its reward function, focused if well-defined, but can be distracted by optimizing faulty proxies.
And helping with human needs.
Human PSPA signals motivate need fulfillment. Hunger, eat, lonely, connect. Maladaptive PSTA, addiction, neglects needs. AI helping with needs requires sophisticated understanding of our ambiguous, conflicting, culturally influenced PSPA signals. Needs to distinguish genuine need from superficial gratification.
And relationships, societal stuff.
Human PSPA there is incredibly nuanced social pleasure pain, short versus long-term trade-offs, cultural values. AI navigating this needs models beyond simple reward maximization, understanding abstract concepts, trust, fairness, reputation, meaning. Otherwise, AI interventions could be naive, even harmful.
The bandwidth is different.
Dramatically. Human PSPA integrates vast, multimodal info over various timescales. AI sensory input and reward channels are much narrower. Huge challenge for AI to truly understand and beneficially interact with human PSPA. Needs richer, more contextually nuanced signal processing.
So with PSPA being so fundamental and AI getting involved, the ethical implications must be huge.
Absolutely massive. PSPA is deeply entangled with ethics. Many moral frameworks analyze right-wrong based on PSPA consequences.
Like utilitarianism.
Directly based on maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain for most. But even deontological, duty-based, or virtue ethics often consider PSPA outcomes, guilt, satisfaction from duty, virtue.
How does PSPA relate to specific ethical behaviors? Truth, greed, cruelty.
PSPA lens helps analyze motivations. Lying might avoid pain of consequences or seek pleasure of gain. Greed, unchecked hedonic pursuit. Cruelty may be perverse pleasure or extreme pain avoidance via control. Societal reactions, norms, laws regulate PSPA, rewarding pro-social, punishing harmful. Empathy, feeling others' pain, social pain of injustice, punishment, inflicting pain for deterrence are all PSPA related.
But it's complex, right? Pleasure for one can be pain for another.
Exactly. PSPA is subjective, can be short-sighted. Short-term pleasure can cause long-term pain. Ethics tries for sustainable, equitable well-being, often requiring transcendence of immediate PSPA impulses. PSPA is the raw material, but right-wrong is judged by consequences filtered through culture, reason, fairness, empathy.
And finally, this all happens within our finite lives. Awareness of mortality influences PSPA.
It absolutely does. Awareness of mortality loss profoundly influences pleasure-seeking and meaning construction. Survival instinct, fear of death, pain avoidance, motivates security, legacy. Search for meaning often involves eudaimonic pleasures beyond simple hedonism.
Faith and belief systems modulate this.
Yes, often explain suffering, promise ultimate pleasure, pain avoidance, offer comfort, sometimes advocate asceticism.
Why isn't PSPA and finitude explicitly taught more?
Maybe implicit learning, complexity, subjectivity. Education often focuses on external goals, discomfort with existential topics, potential for misunderstanding leading to nihilism or crude hedonism.
But PSPA is the constant navigator.
For any sentient being, human self-awareness of finitude makes our navigation uniquely complex, driving that search for meaning beyond biology.
So looking forward, could AI actually help us understand and maybe even manage our own PSPA better?
There's definitely potential there, yes. AI could analyze vast data to find patterns in PSPA responses across populations, model complex interactions, offer personalized insights from individual data, do cross-cultural analysis, even help understand animal PSPA.
And help us manage for better well-being.
Potentially. AI could offer personalized mental health coaching, develop better addiction prevention treatment strategies, promote healthy behaviors via tailored motivators, aid decision-making by highlighting long-term PSPA consequences more vividly, maybe even facilitate finding eudaimonic pursuits by understanding what gives individuals meaning.
What about addressing unfairness or cruelty?
AI could potentially model and detect systemic unfairness in how pleasure pain are distributed, analyze data for cruelty risk factors, though extreme ethical caution needed here, model empathy or pro-social behavior.
And understanding life's finitude.
Maybe facilitate philosophical exploration, help focus on eudaimonic legacy building. But AI's role here should be assistive, enhancing human reflection, not imposing views.
So potential benefits, but with caveats.
Huge potential to illuminate PSPA, help us steer towards well-being, but must be developed with ethical sensitivity, prioritizing autonomy, diverse values, and what truly constitutes thriving.
It really feels like we've come full circle. This PSPA principle isn't just one aspect of us. It's like a fundamental organizing force across existence.
It really is. Its imprint is on how we experience time, temporal discounting, structure, personal history, drive historical trends, seeking security, comfort. It's influenced by genetics shaped by evolution, Darwinian hedonism.
And connections beyond biology, philosophy, physics.
Central theme in philosophy, obviously. Analogical connections in physics principles of least action, entropy maybe having echoes in neural processing, mathematical models in decision game theory, utility optimization, logic, consistency versus contradiction related to cognitive dissonance pain.
And it shapes our state of mind, beliefs.
Chronic pain impacts mood negatively, reward positively. Hedonic flexibility influences resilience. Belief systems interpret suffering, offer paths to pleasure salvation, define moral codes around PSPA.
Affects individuals, those around them, society's reactions.
Drives motivation, learning, personality, mental health. Our actions impact others. Selfishness versus altruism. Societies react with norms laws, rewarding pro-social, punishing harmful. Ethical judgments based on PSPA consequences, with all the complexities we discussed.
Well, this deep dive into the pleasure-pain-seeking pain avoidance principle, PSPA, has been truly, truly fascinating. It's remarkable just how central this concept is.
For understanding ourselves, our history, our societies, and definitely the path forward with artificial intelligence.
It really brings together biology, psychology, philosophy, history, even AI ethics.
Indeed. We've seen its deep biological roots, its profound psychological effects, its massive influence on societies and cultures, the diverse ways philosophers have interpreted it, and now its emerging critical role in how we think about AI.
And as we've unpacked, pleasure and pain are often complex, sometimes paradoxical, yet they are undeniably fundamental in shaping who we are and the world we create.
So, a thought for you listening. As you go about your day, maybe just pause and consider how your own drives towards pleasure, away from pain, might be influencing your choices. Big ones, small ones, your long-term goals.
Are you consciously navigating this fundamental principle? Or is it maybe unconsciously steering you in ways you haven't fully realized?
And what implications might understanding this better have for your relationships, your work, your own search for a meaningful life?
Some really profound questions to reflect on there. We invite you to continue exploring these ideas and maybe spend some time thinking about your own personal operating manual for navigating these powerful, ever-present forces of pleasure and pain.
This is DigitView.